Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, September 13th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the polling numbers for the 2022 midterm elections and what these warning signs, according to the New York Times, are telling us about what we can expect for these November midterm elections. Now, from the title of this video, I'm sure you are recognizing that this main purpose is to talk about the polling errors from the 2020 election and also past elections, apply them to 2022, and see exactly what that means for the composition of the U.S. Senate, which ultimately would be, spoiler alert, still going towards the Democratic Party. Now, this article was released just 2 days ago, actually yesterday, was released by the New York Times, talking about how in a very similar areas to where Democrats were polling well back in 2020 are the same areas in which the surveys missed the most in terms of the actual result back in the past election. And it pretty much goes through the 2020 polling averages and election results and compares them to applying a 2016-like margin of error. For instance, for example, in the state of Wisconsin, if it was off by a margin of about 6 points in 2016, which it was, Hillary Clinton was expected to win by 6 points. She ended up losing by about a point. So you saw about a 6-point shift away from the Democrats there in terms of the actual results, and that's what they applied based off of the 2020 results. Essentially, they took the national numbers and compared them and statewide numbers and applied them based off of the 2016 inaccuracies and then compared them to the actual result. In some states, the inaccuracies did end up predicting the election quite correctly. The inaccuracies from 2016 did end up giving us a better indication and a closer to actual result as to who was going to win. But in some cases, it actually predicted in the opposite direction, making the GOP look as if they were going to perform worse. For example, in Nevada, Biden was up by 6. He won by 2, but based off the 2016 polling error, he should have won by 8. Now, that is definitely an anomaly. It's definitely not routine to see things like that happen, especially for the Democratic Party. Typically speaking, polls do overestimate Democrats. But looking at the 2016-like polling error, in most of these states where Biden was the predicted winner, beyond the states of Florida and North Carolina, they ended up being accurate. There were 2 states that were wrong by polling data. Ohio, Iowa, and Texas were predicted correctly. However, when you apply the 2016-like polling error, you actually get much closer to the actual result in terms of what we can expect. But moving down into what the main conversation here is that the areas in which the Democratic Party is doing well in 2022 are in a very similar frame in this little quadrant here on this chart that shows that in a similar area where the polling errors were very apparent in 2020 is the same area in which polls are going well for Democrats right now. For instance, you see a state such as Wisconsin, Ohio, Florida, states that polls overstated Biden support in 2020 are also showing the Democratic Party performing better than 2020 by this certain amount. For instance, in the state of Pennsylvania, the Democrats are expected to do about 6 to 7 points better than they did in 2020, while in 2020, the polling error was about 4 points. So they're coming into a similar area where you're seeing an overestimation from 2020. They're expected to do better than they did in 2020, so the polling inaccuracies might come along and mean something in terms of the Democratic Party's inability or ability to win these races. But the main point of what this article really I take away from is applying the 2022 Senate polling numbers compared to the 2020-like polling error altogether. It shows the 2020 presidential election result, which is important for context because it tells us, which states are Biden states, which states are Trump states. And generally speaking, we know which states are Biden states and which states are Trump states simply because we've been covering it for quite some time. But it's helpful to look at. But let's disregard that column for just right now. The 2 ones that I want to focus on are, again, the 2022 Senate polling leader right here, which showed the Democrats leading in the majority of these races. Then the 2020-like polling error applied to the said polling leads to see what that would mean for the eventual outcome of the race. Let's go ahead and apply that actually to our traditional map. What I'm going to start off with is by characterizing all of the states that currently are held by a respective political party, even if I think that the state might be going in a different direction in 2022, just for the sake of bringing us to our 50-50 map here. Right now, Republicans currently hold a lot of these races. Democrats hold, of course, an equal amount, but just very interesting looking at some of the areas where the GOP used to have strongholds in, or now does, and will likely expand upon these midterms. So it's a 50-50 tie right now because we have not applied the numbers that we have. But for instance, Colorado, already a blue state, we're going to keep that as such. Pennsylvania, on the other hand, this is one of the states with one of the larger leads for the Democratic Party. I mean, when you take a look at the polling data across the Senate bar, it's right around here, you can see that in every single race beyond Florida and Iowa, the Democrats lead statewide, regardless of the race. Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Washington, These are states that Republicans think are going to be competitive. Democrats think are also going to be competitive, with the exception of Washington, and Democrats are leading in all but 2. So looking at the numbers, the Democrats lead by 8 in Pennsylvania. If you apply a 2020-like polling error, it ends up being a 5-point victory for John Fetterman. Quite a substantial amount, to say the least. Pennsylvania goes lean blue. And already off the bat, you have the Democrats at 51 and the Republicans at 49. And spoiler alert, the rest of the states practically remain the same. Wisconsin ends up going to the GOP by 4. Arizona goes to the Democrats by 6. Nevada goes to the Democrats by less than a point. Georgia goes to the Democrats by about a point. North Carolina and Ohio are the only 2 ones where the polling numbers seem to be inaccurate based off of the 2020 election results, seem to be inaccurate based off the 2020-like polling error, which means we really should not expect those states to go to the GOP, to the Democratic Party. And I don't think many people are. Based off of my current forecast, the states that I have going blue are, coincidentally, because I released this forecast before we saw this article from the New York Times, the same states based off of the 2020 polling error and the actual 2022 polls, the same states that are going blue and the same states that are going red. Wisconsin, for instance, is going red based off my expectation, but Pennsylvania is going blue. North Carolina, Florida, Ohio staying red. Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, New Hampshire staying blue. These are all states altogether that I would say, personally speaking, looking at my prediction, are reaffirmed by what we see from the New York Times. But I will also say that I think in general, this is reaffirming for national Democrats. It isn't just, from the pundit standpoint. It's also from the standpoint that there are Democrats in this country who are terrified about the upcoming midterm elections, but are much more hopeful about the Senate possibilities. Right now, based off of the deluxe forecast, the Democratic Party has a 69% chance at retaining control of the U.S. Senate. 69% of the Republican Party's 31%. Now, this takes into consideration fundraising numbers, past election data, polling data, and expert ratings, because together they give you a very good idea as to how individual races are going to go and how the national environment is going to go as well. But luckily for us, 538 also applies a polls-only forecast, one that is strictly based off of polling data that we get on a state-by-state basis. And on that forecast, the Democratic Party has an 81% chance at victory. Now, both of them showed the Democrats ahead, but obviously one significantly higher at 81%, more than a 4/5 chance at retaining control of the Senate. A very good shot for the Democratic Party, Republicans being at 19%. But I will say that many pundits, many Republicans as well, have pointed out to this and said that the polls are going to be just as wrong as they were in the past. Well, guess what? Even if they are, the Democrats still win. And that's why the deluxe forecast, when you remove yourself from just strictly a polling environment, that's why the expert ratings align with the Democrats. That's why the fundraising numbers align with the Democrats. That's why the past voting history aligns with the Democrats, because the states that the GOP needs to win in order to advance and reclaim the majority are Biden states. Looking at all the states the Democrats currently hold, they don't hold any non-Biden states. Every single state on this map that the Democratic Party currently has an incumbent senator in for the 2022, this class of Senate seats, are Biden states, which means the Republican Party would have to dip into the Biden pool. And a year ago, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, that didn't seem unrealistic at all. The Democratic Party was and still very much is down nationwide, but to a significantly higher extent at that point. And Democrats also now have a new social issue to campaign on that they didn't previously. The issue of Roe, the issue of abortion, the issue of Dobbs. Those are things that the Democratic Party has utilized effectively, as we have seen, to win in special elections, narrow up special elections, and change the national narrative. But the problem is for the GOP that they don't have a pathway to victory as of right now, even if the polls are wrong. The GOP has really been trying to say that 2022's numbers are off. They can't poll correctly. They got 2016 wrong, and they got 2020 wrong. Well, guess what? Reiterating, you reapply the incorrect margins from 2020, and you find that the Democrats still pull out ahead. Even if you were to take 2016. I mean, let's take a look at that. They don't have it on the New York Times average, but generally we have an idea. Colorado wouldn't change by about a point. Pennsylvania would be off by about a point. In fact, Democrats would have a more substantial victory if it was a 2016-like polling error. Arizona, for instance, the Democratic Party, Republicans were spot on. Trump was supposed to win by 4. He won by 3.5. In fact, Mark Kelly would do better. Wisconsin would go red. Nevada would go blue. Georgia would, I believe, go towards the Democratic Party maybe by 1 to 2 points. There's a 5-point victory there for Trump. North Carolina would go red. Ohio would go red, and so would Florida. So in a 2016-like polling error, the year that is so infamous for national political pundits, even though 2020 was technically even more off, 2016 is the one that really upset the nation, really shocked the nation, because the eventual winner of the election was not Secretary Clinton. But my point here is, even if you apply a 2016-like polling error, the Democrats still win the same Senate seats. It doesn't matter what way you cut it, the Democrats are undeniably ahead. And their margins, and their expanding margins in the generic ballot nationwide. On the statewide ballot, looking at individual states and polling numbers, the Democrats are doing well. And the polls are indicating that. But it isn't just that. We are to scrutinize these polls, to look at these polls and see what went right and what went wrong. If we go back to 2020, we can see that, yes, some races were inaccurately predicted by the polls. This is the 538 forecast based off of polling data. Democrats had, a 78% chance of victory. Surprisingly enough, less than what it was for the Democrats. Now, Deluxe ended up giving the Democrats, 75% chance of the light was 78. Classic was 78. Not too much of a difference there. Definitely a much bigger difference for 2022. But you look around, you see Georgia was inaccurately predicted. David Perdue was supposed to win based off of polling data, and he ended up losing. North Carolina was supposed to go to the Democrat, Cal Cunningham, with a 74% chance based off of polling data, and it ended up going towards the Republican, Tom Tillis. You look at the state of Iowa, Teresa Greenfield had a narrow lead, expected to win very narrowly. Actually, it says here that it's 48.9, so I guess supposed to narrowly lose. The margin ended up being around 6 points, so it was off on that regard, but at the end of the day, the polls were wrong. Right? The state of Maine, Sarah Gideon was supposed to defeat Susan Collins with a 70% chance to Susan Collins' 30%. It was a 4-point margin. Sarah Gideon ended up losing by about, 6 to 7 points statewide. But at the end of the day, the state of Maine was supposed to go blue based off of the polling data. So there are times in which polls are inaccurate. But for the states that matter, for instance, in the state of Arizona, even if you apply the 2020 Senate inaccuracy, Mark Kelly was supposed to win by 6, he won by 2. That's a 4-point Republican swing. Well, that 4-point Republican swing would result in a 4-point victory for the Democratic Party. You start to see a consistent trend here. You take a look, let's say, another competitive state. Which ones are competitive? Maybe, let me look at the list here and see which ones we can probably nitpick. We already started with Arizona. There was not a Senate race in Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. Maybe Colorado, right? You take the state of Colorado, a state that, John Hickenlooper was supposed to win by about 9 points. He actually ended up winning by about 9 points statewide. So, seeing that margin, actually, it ended up being quite accurate, and it's very similar. The 2020-like polling error actually results in Democrats winning Colorado by 9 points. I'm trying to see if there's any other examples. Nevada was also not up. Georgia, that's a state that they actually point out as well. They use the presidential numbers, but looking at the Senate numbers, well, for instance, Raphael Warnock, I don't think they have the regular election forecast, but David Perdue was supposed to actually do better, and if the polls are telling us now the Democrats are winning by 2, if you apply it to the Senate race, the one that is not the one that is up in 2022, different race, but a two-way race in terms of which was accurate or not, the polls predicted that David Perdue was going to win, and he ended up losing. So realistically, you could actually improve the Democratic Party's vote share if you were to apply it that way. But obviously, we aren't going to do that because that isn't exactly something that I think is fair. I think we stick with what the New York Times has given us. But my point here, and what I want you to take away from this again, is that no matter what way you cut it, the Democrats still win. This isn't to say the Senate is a done deal by any regard. Republicans having a 31% chance at winning control of the Senate is such an exceptionally high margin. A very good one, I would say, for the GOP. Not necessarily for the national environment, but if we were to just take away what we can expect and what we know about the year altogether, the Republican Party being at a 31% chance isn't exactly the worst position. In the worst position, they could have no chance at winning control of the Senate. And things that have a 1 in 3 chance at happening happen all the time. It's not too far out of the question for Democrats to lose control of the Senate. All it takes is one individual seat, one upset that Republicans need to win. But on the other hand, Republicans need an upset plus 1, right? Because Democrats also seem to be favored at this point in time to win Pennsylvania. So they'd be counteracting an upset, which the Republican Party would need to work harder. And this possibility that Democrats win Pennsylvania has only come into more recent possibility. John Fetterman was always the candidate there. Dr. Oz never really was until the late stages of the campaign season. But generally speaking, people knew it would be competitive, but the Republicans were still expected to win from the beginning. And that is no longer the case. I think as we start to see more data on the generic ballot and President Biden's approval rating, we are going to get to a point where, one political party, the Democrats likely being that party, is going to start to increase and take away from the Democratic Party's vote share. And should that happen, which it, again, very well may, should that happen, the Democrats can be a lot more confident in their chance at victory in 2022 than maybe today. And right now, honestly, if I was looking at this from someone who was on the Democratic Party side, if I was looking at this from someone who was, on the internal strategy for the Democratic Party, I would say I am much more confident in the Senate today than I was yesterday, than I was a month ago, than I was a year ago, because the numbers are getting better. And even if the polls are wrong again, 2016, 2020, forecast-wise, the Democrats retain the Senate. and that should terrify the Republican Party. Because not only do they need a miracle, they need one bigger than 2016, and quite frankly, that doesn't look like it's going to happen. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.